Greetings, traveler of the void. You have entered the domain of void-born terrors. Tonight's chronicle was pulled from a data slate found drifting in the wreck of a Salamander's strike cruiser, its cogitator still warm, its last log still whispering. What it records should not exist. A chapter that wore the wrong colors over the wrong gene seed for 10,000 years. A fortress monastery built upon something that breathes. A Primarch the Imperium refuses to name. Before we descend, secure the Geller field. Strike the rune of approval, that the warp not feast upon this transmission. Join the crew. Subscribe. Now still your hearts, brothers. The Black Father is waiting, and he knows your name. Chapter 1. The Rite of First Skin. I woke in the dark. That was the first mistake, though I did not name it as such. I had slept in the arming cell of Brother-Sergeant for 112 nights since my elevation, and each of those nights, the cell's single lumen strip had burned at half rate above my cot, casting its dim red light upon the iron walls in a steady, sanctified rhythm. The machine spirit of that lumen strip was old. It hissed when it dreamed. I had grown to love the sound the way a son loves the breathing of a sleeping father in the next room. It was the comfort of a thing that watched over me without needing to be asked. The lumen strip was dark this morning. Wholly dark. I lay on my cot in the kind of black that exists only beneath kilometers of basalt. The kind of black that does not yield even to an Astartes enhanced sight. And for the space of 3 slow heartbeats, I could not be certain whether my eyes were open or shut. I could hear the cell's recycling vents drawing breath. I could hear the wet, faint click of my own throat glands. I could not see. I lay still and recited the litany of awakening in silence. I rise upon the Emperor's hand. I rise into the Emperor's light. I rise that I might serve. By the third repetition, my eyes had begun to find the faint thermal bloom of the cell, the warmer rectangle of the cot where I had slept, the colder rectangle of the door, the small bright point that was the heat sink of my armor standing in its rack against the far wall. Then, as a courtesy or a mercy, the lumen strip stuttered once, twice, and engaged. It came on too brightly. It always came on too brightly after a failure. The chapter serfs called this a flushing of the spirit, the machine apologizing for its silence. I called it nothing. I let it pass over me and waited for the brightness to settle, and when it did, I rose. I was 36 standard years out of the apothecarian. I had stood in the line at the Damocles Gulf and not broken. I had bled into the sand of 3 death worlds and the snow of 1. I had taken the helm of Brother-Sergeant at the last festival of the Promethean Flame, and Lord Commander Scyther Vile himself had laid the cobalt-banded gauntlet upon my pauldron and called me true. I was Vassarian Tor'kael of the Black Vipers, of the 3rd Reclusium, sworn to the Black Father and the Emperor of mankind, in that order, as our chapter cult enjoined. For the Son speaks first to the Father who taught him to speak. I was righteous. I was certain. I was, in those last hours before I descended, perhaps the happiest I had ever been. I knelt before my cot and laid my forehead upon the cold iron of the floor, and I recited the litany our chaplain Morgoth had taught me on the night of my elevation. It was the litany of every brother who had risen to sergeant. I had spoken it 112 mornings now, and I would speak it on this morning above all, for on this morning I would walk the rite of first skin, and the litany was the rite's own preamble. From the first skin shed, I whispered into the iron floor, "We are made." From the Black Father's silence, we are kept. From his old hide given, we are armored. Unto his new hide promised, we shall be remade. The Emperor is the sun above us. The Father is the stone beneath us. Both hold us, and we are blessed. I had asked once, and only as a postulant, when a postulant's questions are forgiven, what the new hide promised meant. I had asked Chaplain Morgath, whose hood was always low and whose voice was always patient. He had laid his hand upon my shoulder in the gentle way fathers do when they wish to say, not now, but soon, and he had said only, in time, brother. The Father teaches each son in his own hour. Yours is not yet come. And I had been satisfied, as a postulant is satisfied, and I had not asked again. I do not know if I would have asked again, even as a sergeant, had this morning not come. There is a kind of certainty that the body grows around an unanswered question, the way the flesh grows around a piece of shrapnel, sealing it, walling it, making of it a relic one no longer feels. I rose. The cell was cold. It should have been cold. The arming cells of the Reclusium were carved into the third bastion of Mount Khorai, 1,000 meters above the geothermal mantle that breathed beneath our world's dead skin, and the chapter's engineers held their temperatures at a steady 3 degrees above freezing, because that was the temperature at which a man's breath made the air visible, and a Marine seeing his own breath in his cell was reminded each morning of his mortality. We breathed still, the catechism ran. That is the only blessing the Father guarantees. I saw my breath as I rose. I watched it plume in the lumen strip's grudging light, and I noted with the dispassion that the apothecarian teaches us that the plume was, this morning, the faintest shade of grey-black, as though some fine soot had ridden out of me upon the warm air of my lungs. I dismissed it. Nagakorath is a world that breathes oil mist from its volcanic basins, and that mist finds its way into every chamber of every fortress, no matter how the seals are litanized against it. Even our reclusiams taste of the deep places. Even our prayers smell of the world. I dressed. The chapter serfs had laid out my underlayers the night before. The heavy mesh of the body glove, the ribbed quilted underjacket, the soft padded coif that would receive my helm. I drew them on in the order the litany of vestment required, and each garment as I drew it bore the faint, oily sheen that all our cloth bears in the deep chapels, the sheen we polish from our gauntlets every morning, the sheen that our serfs murmur prayers over before they fold each piece. It is the world's gift to us, the reclusiarchs say. It is the kiss of the deep oil. It is a sign that the stones beneath us remember our names. I had never before noticed that the sheen was very faintly warm to the touch. I went to my armor. It stood in its rack as a saint stands in his alcove, vast and patient, and the lumen strip's light slid across its lacquered black plates in long, slow rivers. The matte black of our chapter's ceramite is unlike the matte of salamander green or the matte of any other lineage I have seen. It is not a painting. It is not a stain. It is the color the ore of Nagakorath takes when it is forged in our own deep furnaces with our own deep flux, and it has a depth to it that catches the eye like the surface of a still pool. One feels, looking at it, that one might step into it. One feels, looking long enough, that something on the other side of it might be looking back. I had spent many hours of my postulancy convinced that this was metaphor, a flourish of our chapter's poets. I no longer think so, but that was a knowledge I had not yet earned on that morning, in that cell. The serpentine filigree that chases our pauldrons and our greaves, and the long curving edges of our helms, is laid in cobalt, not silver. For cobalt does not tarnish in the breath of our world the way silver does, and the cobalt against the black makes our heraldry resemble nothing so much as the markings of a real viper, the kind that hunts in the volcanic shallows of our hatcheries. We wear what we are, the chaplains tell the postulants. That is the honesty of the chapter. We do not pretend to be golden lions or pure flames. We are the patient thing in the rocks, We are the bite that finds the heretic in his sleep. I had loved that. I had repeated it to myself 1,000 times. We are the patient thing in the rocks. I had thought it a noble image. I had not yet understood that the chapter's poets meant it the way a man means a confession. I donned the armor in the prescribed order. Greaves first, then cuisses, then the great cuirass with its central aquila of cobalt on black. The cuirass's machine spirit murmured awake against my chest with a slow, satisfied hum. The hum I had come to know as well as my own heartbeat. "Good morning, brother," it seemed to say. "Good morning, faithful one." I responded as the litany of the awakening spirit required, touching my brow to its central aquila, breathing upon the small sensor port set into the gorget so that my breath might mingle with the suit's. The sensor port took my breath. I felt the suit taste me in that small ritual way that the machine spirits do. The sensor port this morning hissed faintly, as though it had tasted something unfamiliar. I told myself I had drunk too much of the deep water the night before. I told myself the suit was old, as all our suits are old, and old machine spirits have their moods. I told myself a great many things in those last hours, and I told them all with such practiced reverence that I did not notice I was telling them at all. I took up my pauldrons. The left bore the cobalt viper sigil of the 3rd Reclusium. The right, the campaign honors of my sergeancy. 3 small studs, 3 small worlds. 3 small additions to the long ledger of our chapter's faithful murder. I clipped them in place and listened to the soft click of their seals, and the cell around me felt suddenly very full. There is a moment when a Marine is fully armored, when the cell he stands in becomes too small for him. It is not a matter of physical space, it is a matter of presence. The armor amplifies one. It makes of one a small, loud thing in a room that was, a moment ago, only a room. I have felt this every morning of my service. It has always been a comfort. The cell was small. I was large. The Emperor's wrath needed room. This morning, the cell did not feel small enough. I paused with my helm in my hands and considered for the first time that the cell had grown. Not literally. The iron walls had not moved, but the air within it felt deeper, as though the walls had receded by the breadth of a few finger widths in every direction, and left me standing in a room slightly too generous for its purpose. I told myself this was the suit recalibrating its proximity spirits after a night's stillness. I told myself this was the lumen strip's brightness, making the corners seem further than they were. I told myself, and I told myself, and the cell did not shrink. I lifted my helm and looked into its faceplate before I put it on, as is the custom of our chapter, that a brother might know whom he asks the Father to keep. The helm of a black viper sergeant is shaped like the hooded head of a cobra at the moment before its strike, the cobalt filigree rising along the crest where the hood would flare. The eye lenses are not the rounded red of most chapters. They are slit. They are the eyes of the thing in the rocks. I had always thought them beautiful. I had always thought, as I lifted the helm to my own face, "Good morning, brother. Today we serve again." This morning, when I looked into the faceplate's slit eye lenses, I saw my own eyes reflected in the cobalt black glass. They were as they had always been, dark, deep set, with the small ring of paler color at the iris that the apothecarian noted on my elevation as unusual but within tolerance. They were as they had always been. And yet, and I record this faithfully, because I have come to believe that the body knows the truth long before the mind allows itself to know. And yet this morning, when I looked into the slit eye lenses of my own helm, I felt for a single suspended heartbeat that the eyes looking back at me through the cobalt black were not the eyes I was wearing. That something else, deeper in the helm, deeper in the dark, was using my own face as a polished surface to look at me from the other side. I closed my eyes. I recited the litany against the false reflection. I opened my eyes. The helm was a helm. My eyes were my eyes. I put it on. The seals engaged with a hiss. The suit's full machine spirit awoke around me, every plate and joint singing into harmony, the auto senses blooming across my vision in their gentle amber overlay. Ammunition counts, oxygen levels, the soft pulse of the suit's internal sanctifier. The vox bead in my ear hummed up to its standby tone. All was as it should be. All was, in every measurable way, well. I stood for a moment in the awakened weight of the suit, and I prayed. I prayed for my brothers Kydris and Deolan, who would walk the lower halls beside me this morning. I prayed for our chapter serf Veshk, who would carry the relic casket and who had served our reclusium since before my elevation. I prayed for Chaplain Morgath, my confessor, who would lead the descent. I prayed for Lord Commander Sitha Vael in his deeper chambers, whom I had not seen for 40 days, and who, the rumor ran, was again at his meditations. I prayed for my chapter. I prayed for my world. I prayed for the Emperor of mankind upon his golden throne, last and longest, and with the particular weight that our chapter teaches us to give that prayer. For the Father shelters us, but the Emperor lights us, and a son must love the one who lit him most. And then, because it was the morning of my rite of first skin, I prayed the prayer that only sergeants pray, the prayer that had been given to me on the night of my elevation, and that I had spoken every morning since. Father in the deep stone, Father of the patient coil, Father who shed thy old skin that thy sons might wear it, knower of names, keeper of the breath beneath the world. I, Vassarian, thy son and the Emperor's, walk this day toward thee. Find me true, find me worthy, find me and remake me in thy slow time. It was a beautiful prayer. It had always seemed beautiful to me. It was the kind of prayer that asks for transformation in the way the soul of a marine is taught to ask. To be hardened, to be tempered, to be remade in the slow furnace of service into a better instrument of the Imperium's will. I did not know then that remake meant what remake meant. I left my cell. The corridor beyond was empty and very long and very dimly lit, as the corridors of our reclusium always are at this hour, and my footfalls upon the basalt flagstones made a sound that I had heard 10,000 mornings. The heavy, satisfying clap of ceramite on holy stone, the small hiss of my suit's stabilizers in each step. I walked. The corridor passed. I came to the great vaulted gallery that the chapter calls the Hall of Shed Skins. I had walked this hall every day of my service. I had walked it as a postulant and as a neophyte, and as a battle brother and as a sergeant, and not once in those years had it given me pause. It is the chapter's most sacred space, short of the inner shrines themselves. It is the hall in which our chapter masters are remembered. It runs for half a kilometer beneath the third bastion, its vaulted ceiling lost in the lumen haze, its walls lined to left and right with great glass reliquaries, each one tall as a dreadnought and lit from within by the slow amber glow of preserving sanctifiers. In each reliquary rests a shed. That is our word for it. Not a body, not a relic in the ordinary sense. A shed, the molted hide of a chapter master, preserved at the moment of his elevation, on the day he took up his crozius and his coil banner and ascended into his own deeper rite. The chapter teaches that this is a metaphor, that a marine who takes the chapter mastership sheds his old self the way a serpent sheds its skin and is renewed beneath. That what we preserve in the reliquaries are the symbols of that shedding, votive effigies in fine wax and lacquered hide, made by the chapter's artificers in the saint-likeness of each master at the moment of his elevation, and then sealed within the glass that nothing should mar them. I had believed this. I had believed it absolutely. I had walked past those reliquaries every morning for 36 years, and not once paused at a single one of them, because they were symbols, and I had no need to dwell on symbols when there were litanies to be spoken and brothers to be marshaled. I walked the hall of shed skins this morning at a sergeant's pace, which is the pace of a man with a duty ahead of him, and I passed the first reliquary, and the second, and the third, and I did not slow. The reliquaries here held the youngest sheds, the last 7 chapter masters, going back perhaps 1,000 years. Their effigies were unmistakably men. They were marines in repose, kneeling or standing, their preserved hides shaped to the human form, their faces serene beneath the glass. Master Tulmar the Patient, Master Heskian of the Long Coil, Master Vorath who slew the Tyrannid. I had been taught their names in the Schola Progenium of our chapter. I had loved them all in the abstract way a son loves an ancestor he has never met. I walked on. Halfway down the hall, I slowed. I do not know why. Some small thing, some shift in the lumen light, some change in the air, some itch beneath the skin of my ceramite, caused me to slow and to turn my head, and to look properly into the reliquary I happened to be passing. It held the shed of Master Drevak IX, who had ruled our chapter in the late 35th millennium, and who had fallen in single combat against an Eldar Farseer upon the disputed world of Kelm. His effigy knelt within the glass in the posture of prayer, his crozius laid across his thighs, his head bowed beneath his cowl. I had passed Master Drevak IX 10,000 times. I had never looked at him properly. I looked at him properly now. His shed was beautiful. The lacquered hide had been shaped by the artificers into the perfect likeness of an Astartes at prayer. The broad shoulders, the powerful arms, the long-fingered hands clasped about the haft of his crozius. The face was serene beneath the cowl, the eyes closed, the mouth set in the small, satisfied line of a marine who had died well. And his lower body was wrong. I did not see it at first. I saw it the way one sees a misprint in a familiar prayer, the eye reading what the eye expects to read, and the mind shrugging off the small discordance as a flaw of the lumen light or a trick of the angle. The lower body of Master Drevak IX, beneath the kneeling thighs, beneath the greaves of his shed armor, was not quite the legs of a man. The proportions were not human. The shape was longer than it should have been. It tapered at the back of the reliquary in a way that, if I unfocused my eyes, very nearly resembled. I made my eyes focus. The shed wore greaves. The greaves were the greaves of an Astartes. The legs within the greaves were the legs of an Astartes. The effigy was the effigy of a kneeling chapter master, and I, Vassarian Tor'kael of the Third Reclusium, was a fool standing in a holy hall and reading mysteries into the artistry of my own chapter's saints. I recited the litany against doubt. I walked on, but my pace was slower now, and as I walked, I let my eyes do what they had never done in this hall. I let them count back. The youngest sheds, near the hall's near end, were unmistakably men. Halfway down, where Master Drevak knelt, the effigies began to display that small wrongness of proportion that I had so nearly missed. And further down, deeper into the hall, where the older masters lay. I did not look. I did not let myself look. I walked with my eyes ahead, and my litany on my tongue, and I told myself that I was a sergeant on the morning of his rite, and that I had no business letting the artistry of long-dead saints distract me from the duty of the day. I told myself this in the firm, paternal voice that I used on my own postulants when they asked questions a postulant ought not to ask. But I had walked perhaps 50 paces further before I realized that the firm paternal voice in my head was not, this morning, my voice. It was Chaplain Morgath's. I had been hearing my own thoughts in the voice of my confessor for several minutes, and I had not noticed. I stopped walking. I stood in the center of the hall of shed skins, with the youngest masters at my back and the oldest before me. And for the first time in 36 years of service, I understood that I was afraid. Not of anything I could name. There was no enemy. There was no breach. The hall was as silent as it had ever been, and the lumen haze was as gentle, and my brothers were waiting for me at the mouth of Ash, and the chapter was at peace. There was nothing to be afraid of. I was afraid anyway. I made myself move. I made myself walk, and I made my eyes look only ahead, and I did not look into the reliquaries to my left or to my right, and I did not count, and I did not let my mind run along the small, soft path it had begun to run along, the path that wanted to know what shape the oldest sheds had been made into, and why, and by whom. I walked. I prayed. I came to the far end of the hall, where Chaplain Morgath waited for me beside the great black iron door that the chapter calls the Mouth of Ash. He smiled. He always smiled. His hood was low, as it was always low, and within the hood his face was the kind, ascetic face of the man who had heard my first confession on the day I was made a postulant. He had aged in the way our chaplains age, slowly and not where one looks. His hands within his sleeves were folded as a confessor's hands are always folded, patient and waiting and unhurried. "Brother Vassarian," he said, and his voice was the voice I had heard in my own head some 100 paces back. "Thou art come." I knelt. I touched my brow to the cold flagstone before the Mouth of Ash. I spoke the response that the rite required. "I have come, Father. I am come to walk where the masters have walked. I have come to be known." He laid his hand upon my helm. The gesture was the gesture I had received 100 times. It has always been a comfort. This morning, with the slit eye lenses of my helm looking up at him from the flagstone, and the cobalt filigree of my hood catching the dim red light of the Mouth of Ash's wardings, his hand upon my helm felt very precisely like the hand of a man laying his palm upon a thing he had been waiting a very long time to claim. "Rise, my son," said Chaplain Morgath the Whisperer. "Thy brothers wait below. The Father is patient, but he has been patient long enough this morning for thee." I rose. The Mouth of Ash opened before me with the slow, satisfied sigh of a thing exhaling after a long sleep, and the air that came out of it was warm, and it smelled, faintly, gently, only at the very back of the throat, of marrow left in the sun, and of my own venom glands, and of something older that I had no word for, and would not have one for some hours yet. I drew breath. I walked into the dark. The Mouth of Ash closed behind me with a sound that, had I been listening properly, I might have recognized as a swallow. Traveler, the mouth has closed, and the Father has begun to taste him. Chapter 2 waits in the breathing dark, where the bones lie in patient flagstones, and the walls remember the names of those they have already taken. See you there as we descend again. Chapter 2 The Gallery of What We Were. The dark beyond the Mouth of Ash was not the dark of a sealed chamber. It was the dark of a throat. I record that judgment now, with the cold honesty of a man who has nothing left to protect. But I did not know it then. Then, I knew only that my helm's autosenses had bloomed across my vision in their gentle amber overlay and were telling me, in the calm, reassuring script of the suit's machine spirit, that I stood at the head of a long, natural cavern, that the air temperature was warmer than it ought to be by some 7 degrees. that the atmospheric composition contained trace organic vapors of a type the suit did not have litany for, and that I was alone. The suit was wrong about the last. I learned that within 50 paces. I walked. My helm lumens engaged in their soft red mode, the mode our chapter prefers in shrines, that the eyes of the Father not be insulted by white light, and the cavern revealed itself to me in slow, grudging segments. The walls were not the natural basalt of Nagakorath's deep places. They had been working, polished. The chapter's laborers had taken the rough stone of this descent in some long age before living memory, and they had brought it to the kind of mirror smoothness one expects of a reliquary's inner surface. My helm lumens slid across the walls and came back doubled, tripled, the red light pooling in the polished black the way blood pools in a steel basin. I could see my own reflection in the wall to my left. I could see, faintly, a second reflection of my own reflection in the wall to my right. I walked, and the two reflections walked with me, and I told myself that this was the chapter's artistry, that the masters who had walked this descent before me had been honored by being shown alongside their own multiplied selves, as a man is doubled in a hall of saints. I told myself that. I recorded faithfully. I told myself that, and I walked on, and I did not look too long at the wall on my right, because the reflection on my right was, for a span of perhaps 3 paces, and then no longer, a half pace behind the reflection on my left. The breathing began at 50 paces. It was not loud. It was, in the strictest acoustic sense, barely a sound at all. The slow, soft displacement of air that one feels rather than hears. The kind of pressure shift a man notes in his sinuses before he notes it in his ears. My helm's auto-senses caught it before I did. A small new line of script appeared in my amber overlay. Atmospheric oscillation detected. Frequency, 0.14 Hertz. Source, undetermined. I read the script. I passed it. 0.14 Hertz. 1 cycle every 7 seconds. The cavern was inhaling and exhaling once every 7 seconds, and the suit's machine spirit could not tell me from where. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The pressure shift came again, the soft warm push of air against my faceplate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And again. The walls of the cavern pulsed in time with the pressure, so faintly that the suit's optics nearly dismissed the motion as a lensing artifact of the polished stone. But I, behind the optics, could feel it through the soles of my ceramite boots. The floor rose by perhaps the breadth of a finger. The floor fell. The walls drew in. The walls eased back. The cavern was breathing, slowly, patiently, around me. I told myself it was an air pressure differential from the deeper geothermal vents. I told myself the geological surveys our chapter's tech priests had performed in the Founding Age noted such phenomena in the basalt of Nagakorath. I told myself a great many things in those first 100 paces, and I told them all in Chaplain Morgarth's voice, without quite noticing that I had begun to think in his voice rather than my own. Walk on, my son. The deep places of the world are strange. The Father has prepared this strangeness for thee. Walk on. I walked on. The path beneath my feet changed at perhaps the 200th pace. The polished basalt gave way to something paler, set into the floor as flagstones. Long oval shapes, slightly domed, their surfaces worn smooth by what must have been centuries of patient ceramite. My helm lumens picked out their pallor against the dark, and my auto-senses obligingly catalogued them. Composition: calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, trace osteoid matrix. Origin: organic. I stopped. I knelt. I touched a gauntleted hand to the nearest flagstone. The suit's machine spirit confirmed what my eyes had already told me. In the small, dispassionate script it reserves for facts a Marine does not wish to confirm. Bone. Astartes derivative. Estimated age, 700 to 900 standard years. I knelt longer than I should have. I knelt long enough for the cavern around me to draw 3 full breaths, in and out, in and out, in and out. The soft, warm pressure of its exhalation fogging the deep cobalt black of my reflection in the polished wall beside me. I knelt with my gauntleted hand upon the dome of an Astartes femur cut and set as a paving stone, and I did the kind of arithmetic that an honest mind does when the conclusion will be unbearable. 700 to 900 standard years. The bone of a Marine set into the floor of a holy descent. 700 to 900 standard years. A brother had walked this path before me and had not walked back, and his thigh had been taken from him and laid here for my ceramite boot to fall upon. I rose. I told myself that the suit's machine spirit was old, and old spirits err in their cataloguing, and the flagstones were stone-shaped to resemble bone in the way our chapter so loves its bone and coil metaphors. I told myself that. I walked on. The pale flagstones stretched before me into the breathing dark, and each one of them was a brother, and each one of them did not crack beneath my weight, because each one of them was old and settled, and the chapter had been laying this path for a very long time. The gallery announced itself by a widening. The cavern's polished walls drew apart at perhaps the 300th pace, and my helm lumens, which had been pooling against narrow walls, suddenly had no walls to pool against. The chamber beyond was immense. My auto-senses cast a ranging pulse and reported a ceiling 30 meters above, and a far wall some 120 meters distant. The bone path continued through its center. To either side, set into the walls in slow-marching alcoves, lit each from within by the same amber sanctifier light that lit the reliquaries of the hall above, stood the masters, or what the masters had been. I do not know what to call the discipline that carried me forward then. It was not courage. Courage is the thing a Marine summons to face a known horror. I summoned a different thing. In those first paces into the gallery, I summoned the refusal to look, the Marine's deep-trained capacity to pass through a chamber on the strength of his orders alone, his eyes fixed on the doorway opposite, his peripheral vision permitted to register threat and nothing else. I walked the bone path. I did not look into the alcoves. I told myself I would not look. I looked. The first alcove I let my eyes fall upon held a space Marine kneeling in prayer, in the same posture as the kneeling shed of Master Drevak IX, a hall above. His helm was off. His hands were clasped upon the haft of a crozius laid across his thighs. His face was lifted slightly, as though he prayed not to the floor, but to some height above him, and his eyes were closed in the small, satisfied line of a Marine who has died well. His face was almost the face of a man. The jaw was a fraction too long. The cheekbones receded toward the temple, at an angle no apothecary would have signed off. The lips, parted slightly in his prayer, did not quite close over teeth that were a fraction too many. The skin, preserved in some clear lacquer the chapter's artificers had mastered, was the deep matte black of our chapter's ceramite, but threaded faintly, very faintly, with iridescent green and gold along the line of the throat, where the scales had only just begun. He was beautiful. I record that, with the particular shame of a man who recorded it then and feels it still. He was beautiful, and some deep cellular thing in me, some thrumming behind the sternum that I had been taught all my life to call the Emperor's grace, recognized him and was glad. I made myself walk on. The second alcove held the same posture, the same crozius across the thighs, the same upturned face. But the jaw was longer, and the cheekbones had receded further, and the teeth no longer fit behind the lips. The skin along the throat had darkened from matte black to the same iridescent green and gold I had seen at the first master's collar, and it had crept up to the line of the cheek. The third alcove, the fourth, the 10th. By the 10th alcove, the kneeling figure's hands no longer clasped a crozius. They could not. The fingers had lengthened. The nails had thickened and curved into something that was no longer a nail, and not yet a claw. The crozius lay upon the alcove's floor beside him, set there reverently by some artificer who had understood that the master had outgrown his weapon before he had outgrown his prayer. By the 20th alcove, the kneeling figure was not kneeling. He was coiled. The legs and the hips and the lower spine had become a long, pale and iridescent thing that wrapped twice around the alcove's floor before terminating in a tail, and the upper body, chest, shoulders, arms, face, rose from the center of the coil like a marine emerging from a still pool. His face was still lifted. His eyes were still closed. He was still at prayer. By the 40th alcove, the upper body had shortened. The arms were thinner, the chest narrower. The face, and I record this exactly, the face was the face of a serpent that remembered being a man. The slit eyes were closed in the line of a marine's serene death. The mouth was set in the satisfied small line, but the cheekbones were no longer cheekbones. They were the broad, flat plates of a viper's hood, drawn back along the skull. The cobalt filigree of the chapter's heraldry still picked out in the scales of the hood, as a chapter serf might pick out the heraldry of his lord upon a banner. By the 100th alcove there was no upper body at all. There was only coil, vast coil, many meters of it, wrapping the alcove like a great rope of black and iridescent muscle, and at the coil's far end the suggestion, only the suggestion, of a flat, broad head, eyes closed, mouth closed, resting at last after a long and faithful service. I had stopped walking. I had stopped walking some time ago, I realized. I was standing at the center of the gallery's bone path, halfway between the 100th alcove on my right and the 100th alcove on my left, and the cavern was breathing around me, and my helm's autosenses had begun to flash a small new warning script in my amber overlay. Vital signs irregular, heart rate elevated, adrenal response active. Brother Sergeant, are you in distress? I keyed the suit's confessional mode. No, I told it. No, I am well. The Emperor protects. The suit's machine spirit accepted my answer with the small, grateful hum it always made when one of its concerns was dismissed. It had been built to believe me. It was a very old machine spirit, and a very loyal one, and it had been built in a forge that had been built by men who had never walked the gallery of what we were. It believed me. I do not blame it. I walked the rest of the bone path with my eyes fixed upon the far end of the gallery, and I did not let them stray, and I told myself with each pace, symbols. These are symbols. The chapter's artificers have made of our chapter masters a parable, that the postulant might understand the metaphor of the chapter cult. From the first skin shed, we are made. This is sculpture. This is teaching. This is not. And I would not let the thought complete itself. This is not what they became. I record it now because I must record it. I did not let the thought complete itself then, but the thought was complete in me anyway, in the deeper place where thoughts complete themselves without permission. The hall of shed skins a kilometer above did not preserve the first molt of each chapter master. It preserved their only molt, made in the morning. They took up the crozius and descended into this gallery and began. The chapter had been laying its masters into these alcoves for 10,000 years, and what waited at the end of the path, at the end of the slow walk through the alcoves, at the 100th and beyond, was not a symbol. I came to the lectern at the gallery's far end. It stood upon a low dais of the same polished basalt as the walls, a simple thing of black iron, and upon it rested a tablet of beaten gold the size of a marine's palm. My helm lumens caught the gold and threw it back at me in soft red, and the script upon the tablet was the script that had been carved into the great vault door of the mouth of Ash. The script that I had been told, as a postulant, was a dialect of High Gothic, and that my eyes had never been able to resolve. My eyes have resolved it now. I do not know what changed. Some lock had given way, in the descent or in the breathing, or in the long passage of the alcoves, and the script that had been opaque to me all my life was suddenly as clear as the catechism. I read it. I read it twice, because I could not believe I was reading it. I read it a third time, because I had to be certain that the failure was mine and not the tablet's, and the tablet was patient, and the tablet did not change. We are not the sons of Vulkan. We are the sons of the first shed. He gave us his old skin, that we might wear it until ours was ready. Pray, brother, that yours is ready when the Father calls. I read it. I read it. I read it. I straightened from the lectern. I turned. The gallery stretched behind me in its long, slow march of alcoves, and the breathing cavern pulsed around me, and the bone path lay pale beneath my ceramite boots. I drew the kind of breath a marine draws when he has, in the space of a single inhalation, lost everything. And then the voice spoke. It did not speak aloud. It spoke inside me, inside the genocide-altered marrow of my bones, inside the thrumming behind my sternum that I had spent my entire service calling the Emperor's grace, and that had, in fact, never once been the Emperor's grace at all. It was fond. It was patient. It was the voice of a father who has watched his son struggle with a difficult catechism, and who has, at last, decided to help. "Thou hast read it, little son," the voice said. "Thou hast read the old tongue. Don't you wonder why?" My mouth filled with venom. It was my own venom, from my own glands, the small sanctified glands that every black viper bore at the back of the upper palate. The glands that the chapter's apothecaries assured us were a refinement of the salamander gene seed under the pressures of Nagakorath's unique ecology. But this morning, the venom glands were producing more than they had ever produced. The venom welled up and ran from the corners of my mouth before my throat. Reflex could swallow it, and it pooled inside my helm against my chin, warm and slow, and the suit's machine spirit registered the fluid and politely opened the helm's small drainage port to let it weep out onto the polished floor. I lifted a gauntleted hand to my mouth beneath the helm, on instinct. My gauntlet came away black. Not red. Black. My blood. For some of the fluid at the corners of my mouth was blood, the small vessels of my palate having given way under the pressure of the glands, was no longer the deep arterial red of a space marine. It was black. It caught the red of my helm lumens and threw it back as the deep matte black of our chapter's ceramite, and beneath the matte, faintly, very faintly, the iridescent green and gold of the scales I had seen at the throats of the kneeling masters in the alcoves. I stood in the gallery of what we were with my own changed blood upon my gauntlet, and the voice in my marrow waited, patient and fond, for me to finish understanding. I turned. I ran. I do not record my flight back along the bone path with pride. An Astartes does not run. An Astartes withdraws in good order. I ran. I ran with the long-legged stride of a marine whose ceramite has been built for the charge, and the flagstones of brother bone clapped beneath my boots and did not crack, and the breathing cavern drew its slow, patient breaths around me, and was not troubled by my passing. I reached the great iron gate of the descent. I pounded upon it with the flat of my gauntlet, and the suit's machine spirit, alarmed, vocalized on my behalf through the gate's external vox pickup. Open, open. The Father is not the Emperor. Open. The gate opened. Chaplain Morgath the Whisperer stood beyond it. His hood was low as always. His hands were folded in his sleeves. Beside him knelt Brother Iolan, young, devout, freshly elevated, with his helm off and his eyes wide and his cheeks wet with tears that, even from where I stood, I could see were the deep matte black of changed blood. Brother Cadris was not there. I had walked into the descent with 2 brothers and a serf. I had walked back with one brother gone and the other already weeping the wrong color. I tried to speak. The venom was still in my mouth, and the words came out thicker than they should have, and the suit's vox pickup compensated and broadcast them in their proper clarity, even as my own tongue stumbled. Where, I said, is Cadris? Chaplain Morgath smiled. It was the smile I had received 100 times. It was the smile of my confessor, the man who had heard my first prayer as a postulant, and my last prayer as a battle brother, and every prayer between. It was a kind smile. It was a fond smile. And it widened this morning, in a way I had never quite seen it widen before. Brother Cadris, said Morgath gently, was not true. The Father knew. Do not weep, my son. Cadris serves us still. He is in the walls now. He is breathing, and in the long, suspended heartbeat before I understood him, in the moment between his words and the meaning that opened beneath them like a pit beneath a flagstone, I realized that the breathing of the cavern, the slow, patient 7-second pulse that had drawn its warm air across my faceplate for the entire length of the descent, had a rhythm I recognized. It was Brother Cadris's breath. It had been all along. Traveler, the gate has opened, and Vassarian has come back changed, and his brother is in the walls. Chapter 3 waits upon the hatching floor, where the stone is not stone, and the kneeling brothers are content, and the chalice is poured. Stay with me. We shall descend together there next. Chapter 3 What blooms beneath the scales? Morgath the Whisperer took me to a small chamber off the descent, and there he confessed his chapter to me as a father confesses his trade to a son who has come of age. The chamber was not large. It had been carved in some patient age from the polished basalt of the descent itself, and its walls bore the same mirror smoothness I had seen in the breathing cavern above. A low bench of black iron ran along one wall. A brazier of beaten cobalt sat upon a tripod in the chamber's center, and within the brazier, a coal of the deep oil of Nagakorath burned with the slow, fat-fed flame our chapter calls the Promethean ember. Though I record now, with the bleak clarity of one who has learned the chapter's vocabulary the second time, that we never burned promethium in our shrines. We burned the world's own black bleeding. We had always burned the world's own black bleeding. The chaplains had only ever called it promethium, because promethium was a word the Imperium expected of a Salamander's successor, and the Imperium had been listening to our chapter for 10,000 years through the small, careful audits of its tithe officers and its visiting inquisitors, and our chapter had been answering those audits in the careful vocabulary of a chapter that wished to be heard. I sat on the bench because Morgath gestured that I should. The suit's machine spirit had begun to query my refusal to remove my helm. Brother-Sergeant, atmospheric conditions are within tolerance. Helm may be safely doffed. And I had silenced the query with the dismissive thought pulse that an old Marine learns to throw at his own armor when his armor grows fretful. I would not remove my helm. I record that with shame now. I would not remove my helm because I did not wish to see, in the polished cobalt of the brazier, or in the mirror wall behind Morgath's hooded head, the face that was waiting beneath my faceplate. The venom had stopped welling at the corners of my mouth, but the inside of my helm tasted of it, and the suit's drainage port had run twice during the short walk to this chamber, and I had felt, in the soft, hot pulse of my own gums, that my teeth, had begun very slowly, very gently, to lengthen. I would not remove my helm. Morgath did not press me. He knelt opposite me on the basalt floor, in the easy kneeling posture of a man who had spent more of his life kneeling than standing, and he folded his hands within his sleeves, and he spoke. His voice, in the small confessional intimacy of that chamber, was not the voice that had said, "Brother Kaidrus is in the walls now." It was the voice of the confessor who had received my first stammered postulant's confession on the night I was inducted. It was the voice that had said, "The Emperor forgives a son his trembling brother. Only an honest son trembles at his first confession." I had loved that voice. Some part of me, some still trembling postulant's part, loved it still. That was the cruelty of it. I record that now. The cruelty of Chaplain Morgath was that he did not stop loving me when he revealed what he was. He loved me. He used the same voice. He used the same hands. He used the same patient, paternal, infinitely careful cadence that had taught me to pray, and he used it to teach me what I had been praying toward. And I sat upon the iron bench and let him, because I had been taught all my life that to sit and let the chaplain speak was to be a son in good standing. "Brother Vassarian," he said, "I shall tell thee the chapter now. I shall tell thee what thy postulancy could not be told, and what thy neophytehood could not be told, and what thy battle brotherhood could not be told. The Father has decided that thou art ready, and the Father is rarely wrong. Hear me without interruption, and when I have done, ask what thou wilt." I nodded inside the helm. He could not see the nod. He read it from the small movement of my pauldrons, the way a confessor reads a postulant. He told me the chapter. He told it gently, the way a man tells a child where its mother has gone. He told me that the black vipers were not the sons of Vulkan. He told me that we had never been the sons of Vulkan. He told me that 10,000 years ago, 10,000 years, brother, the number is exact, not approximate, in the chaos of the founding storms that followed the heresy, when the Adeptus Mechanicus was reconstituting itself from the wreckage of its own treasons, and the records of gene seed lineages were being reconciled and re-archived and re-sanctified across 100 forge worlds. The first chapter master of what would come to be called the Black Vipers had presented to the Mechanicus a sealed reliquary of gene seed bearing the markings of Vulkan, and the Mechanicus had received it, and the Mechanicus had archived it, and the Mechanicus had founded a chapter upon it. The sealed reliquary had been honest. The gene seed within it had been honest. It had been Salamander's gene seed, taken in good faith from the archives of Nocturne, and the Mechanicus had verified it with all the litanies and all the Auspex scans and all the careful tithe tests that the Mechanicus knew. The chapter had not been founded upon that gene seed. The chapter had been founded upon what was in the second reliquary, the reliquary the first chapter master had carried at his hip beneath his cloak, the reliquary that had never been shown to the Mechanicus and never been logged and never been verified. That reliquary had borne the gene seed of something else, and the Marines who had been bred from it had been bred to resemble salamanders for a generation or two. The matte black skin, the high resistance to heat, the volcanic homeworld, because resemblance was the price of being archived, and being archived was the price of being permitted to exist. The first chapter master had understood that price, and he had paid it for 10,000 years, and counting. I asked the obvious question. My voice through the helm's vox was thicker than it should have been. "Father, what gene seed?" Morgath did not answer. He looked at me for a long, patient moment, with his hood low and his hands folded in his sleeves, and he smiled the small confessor's smile that I had received 100 times, and he said, "That, brother, is for the Father to tell thee, not me. I am only his whisper." He rose. He gestured to the door of the small chamber. "Come," he said, "I shall show thee thy brother Iolin. Thou hast not yet seen him properly. It will help thee understand." I rose. The suit's machine spirit, sensing my elevated pulse, offered me a calming stim from its forearm dispenser. I refused it. I record now that I refused not because I did not want the calm, but because some still righteous part of me understood that I had no right to it. Iolin was in the next chamber. He was kneeling upon the basalt floor, his pauldron set aside, his cuirass set aside, his body glove peeled to the waist. His back was to me as I entered, and the long ridge of his spine, the great fused vertebrae that an apothecary's chisel had shaped from a normal youth's spine into the bracing column of an Astartes, was visible in the amber sanctifier light, and the skin along that ridge was clouding. I record the verb exactly because the verb is exact. His skin was clouding the way the surface of a deep pool clouds when something rises beneath it. The deep matte black of an Astartes service skin was lifting away from the body in a fine, papery film, and beneath it, in long, iridescent strips along the line of the spine, a new skin was coming up, green and gold. The colors I had seen at the throats of the masters in the alcoves, the colors I had felt in the deep cellular recognition behind my sternum that I had been born to and only just now permitted to remember. He turned his head when I entered. He smiled. His eyes, the whites of them, had begun to glass over with a faint dark film, like the nictitating membrane of a serpent at rest. His nose had begun, very gently, to recede. The bridge of it was lower than it had been at our morning's muster. The nostrils had drawn back just slightly, just enough that the suit's autosenses, if I had asked them, would have measured the change in millimeters and shrugged. "Brother Vassarian," said Iolin, and his voice was the voice of the young marine I had stood beside at the mouth of Ash 3 hours before. "Hast thou seen the Father?" "I have not yet. The chaplain says I shall see him soon. Is he as beautiful as the litanies say?" I have wanted to ask, all my service, but it was not seemly to ask. I did not answer. I do not know what I would have answered. Some answer was forming in my throat. "Iolin, thy face," and the answer choked itself off on the venom and on the new wet rasp of my own lengthening teeth against the inside of my mouth, and on the slow, soft horror of understanding that Brother Iolin could not see what he was becoming, because the chamber held no mirror, and the chaplains had removed his helm before he could look at himself in its faceplate. He had been spared. I record that with the bleakest pity I have ever set to slate. He had been spared the moment I had been forced to endure, the moment of looking into the cobalt black of one's own faceplate and seeing the other thing looking back. Iolin had been given his change without the witness of it. He thought, kneeling there with his cuirass set aside and his back blooming with the wrong colors, that he was being merely sanctified. I thought then of intervening. I thought of crossing the chamber and taking the young marine by the shoulder and telling him, "Brother, look at thy hands. Brother, look at thy back. Brother, this is not what thou wast taught." I thought of it. I did not do it. Morgath was beside me at the door, his hand at his sleeve, his patience absolute, and the still trembling postulant's part of me, the part that loved the chaplain's voice, understood that to intervene would not be to save Brother Iolin. It would be to expose him to a horror he was being protected from. The change would happen either way. The change had already happened. To make him see it was only to make him suffer in the seeing. I did not intervene. I record that. I record it with full understanding of what my non-intervention purchased. "Come," said Morgath gently. "Iolin is at his peace. Let him keep it. Thou and I have further to walk." He led me on. We left Iolin kneeling there with his back to the lumen light and his new skin blooming beneath his old, and we walked deeper into the descent, and Morgath spoke as we walked, and the breathing of the cavern around us drew its slow 7-second breaths, and somewhere in the rhythm of those breaths, though I did not look for it now, did not let myself look for it, was the last respiration of Brother Cadris. "The chalice," said Morgath as we walked, "is offered today, brother. Thou hast not yet drunk. I shall tell thee what the chalice is, because the Father has asked me to be honest with thee. He says thou art a son who deserves honesty. He says thou hast carried thy questions long enough." I did not speak. He went on. "The chalice is what the Father weeps. It comes from the deep stone. The chapter's apothecaries gather it in long copper vessels and warm it with the oil of our world, and they bring it to the descent on the morning of each sergeant's elevation, and the sergeant drinks. Every brother of our chapter, in his 36th year of service, has drunk. I drank. Scyther Vile drank. Ulthred, thy teacher, drank. The chalice is what makes the change honest. It does not begin the change, brother. The change began the day thy gene seed was implanted, and it has been proceeding in thee ever since, slowly, beneath thy skin, in the small, careful patience of the Father's work. The chalice only makes it known to thee. The chalice only opens thy eyes to what has been true all along." I stopped walking. I recorded this stop. I record it because it was the last act of my own will that I performed in that descent, and I wish to set down clearly, for any brother who reads this slate, the precise instant at which my own will gave way. I stopped in the polished black corridor. I turned to Chaplain Morgath. I said through the helm's vox pickup, with the suit's machine spirit translating my thick-changed tongue into the clear voice of a Marine, "Father, I have not consented." Morgath stopped also. He turned to face me. He folded his hands within his sleeves. His hood was low. His patience was the patience of a man who had had this conversation many times. "Brother," he said, "thou hast." "I have not," I said. "Brother," he said again more gently, "thou hast. Thou consented when thou tookst the gene seed. Thou consented when thou tookst the black carapace. Thou consented with every breath drawn in this monastery, for the air of this monastery is the breath of the Father, and the Father has been within thee since thy first inhalation in our halls. The chalice is not consent, brother. The chalice is honesty. Thou hast already drunk. Thou hast been drinking slow and small for 36 years. The cup is only the moment at which we tell thee." I stood in the polished black corridor, and I felt the venom in my mouth, and the new wet rasp of my teeth, and the long faint clouding of the skin along my own forearms, where the body glove had ridden up against the gauntlet, and I understood, with the cold, complete understanding of a Marine who has just lost an argument he did not know he was losing, that Morgath was telling the truth. I had not been asked. I had not been asked because there had been no asking left to do. The asking had been concluded in some small private chamber of the apothecarian on the day a chapter serf had laid the first Geneseed organ into the cavity of my postulant's chest, and the apothecary had said the litany over it, and the litany had not been the litany I had been told. I had been a black viper since I was 17 years old. I had only been aware of being a black viper since I was 17 years old, plus one helmet's breadth of time. I did not weep. The eyes inside my helm were no longer eyes that could weep. The tear ducts had clouded over with the same faint dark film that had risen across Brother Siolin's gaze, and the suit's autosenses were reporting the change in their patient amber script and politely asking whether I wished them to log it. I told them yes. Let it be logged. Let the slate carry it. Morgoth laid his hand upon my pauldron. He led me on. We walked further and deeper, and the polished black corridor opened at last into a place that the chapter's interior maps had never shown me, and that the chapter's catechisms had never named, but that I record now with the name Morgoth gave it as we crossed its threshold, the hatching floor. The chamber was vast. I cannot give it proper measure. My helm's autosenses cast a ranging pulse and reported only that the pulse did not return, and that I should proceed on the assumption that the chamber was large enough that the ranging pulse did not return. The ceiling was lost. The walls were lost. The amber sanctifier light came up from below from the floor itself, in a slow, soft radiance, as though the floor were warm and the warmth had a color. The floor was not stone. I recorded this exactly. The floor of the hatching floor was not stone. It was a thick, leathery, faintly warm surface that yielded by perhaps the breadth of a finger beneath the weight of my ceramite boot, and rippled very gently in slow concentric circles outward from each footfall, the way the surface of a still pond ripples when a leaf falls upon it. The suit's machine spirit, alarmed, attempted to catalogue the substance and produced an error script I had never seen before. Surface composition, organic. Surface structure, keratinous. Surface origin, undetermined. Brother-Sergeant, query. Are we walking on something that was alive? I silenced the query. I did not need the query. I knew what I was walking on. I had seen the 100th alcove of the gallery. I had counted the alcoves. I knew, with the cold understanding of a son who has finally read his father's name, that what lay beneath my boots was not a floor. It was a shed. And around me, in the slow, soft amber light that rose from beneath it, my brothers knelt. A dozen of them, more. They knelt at intervals across the great chamber in the postures of meditation, their armor set aside, their bodies in various stages of the change, and they did not look up as Morgoth led me among them. They were at peace. They were content. And in the center of the chamber, where the floor curved gently downward into a great circular pit, hundreds of meters across, a sound began to rise. The slow, fond, patient sound of a voice that had already spoken my name 100 times in my own marrow, now preparing, at last, to speak it aloud. "Vassarian," said the voice from the pit. "Come down, little son. I have waited so long for thee. Come and only look. Traveler, Vassarian has been led to the hatching floor, and the father is calling him by name from the pit, and the chalice has not yet been drunk, but the body has already begun. The next chapter awaits in the deepest chamber, where the Black Father reveals himself, and a righteous son makes the choice that damns him." Chapter 4. The Black Father's Name. I walked among my kneeling brothers, and I did not look at them. I had learned in the gallery of what we were the discipline of not looking. It served me again now. I walked through the slow amber radiance of the hatching floor with my eyes fixed upon the great soft curvature of the pit ahead, and the kneeling forms of my changed brothers passed at the edges of my vision as small, dark shapes I refused to particularize. I record now, with the cold honesty I have promised this slate, that there were perhaps 50 of them. I record also that I recognized the silhouettes of perhaps a dozen, the broad shoulders of veteran Sergeant Tulach, who had taught me close quarters bolter Rite in my 3rd year of neophytehood, the lean upright posture of Brother Apothecary Kyle, who had carried my postulant's gene seed implantation, the long-necked, slightly stooped stance of old Reclusiarch Vulkan, who I had not seen for 4 decades and who had been reported, in the chapter's official archive, fallen in meditation at the deep shrines. He had not fallen. He had only knelt and continued and changed and waited. I did not look at them properly. I did not let myself. The discipline held. I walked. Morgoth the Whisperer walked beside me, his hood low, his hands folded in his sleeves, the small confessor's smile playing at the edge of his mouth, as a man's smile plays when he watches a son perform a difficult task with unexpected grace. He did not speak. He did not need to. The voice in the pit had spoken, and it had spoken my name, and there was nothing further for any chaplain to say. I walked toward the voice because the voice had called, and because the soles of my ceramite boots were sinking very slightly into the shed of the floor with each step, and because I had nowhere else to go. The pit's edge resolved as we approached. It was not the sharp cut of an excavation. It was the soft, gradual curve of a thing that had opened in the floor, as though the great leathery surface of the hatching floor were the closed lid of an enormous, slow-blooming flower, and at the chamber's center the petals had drawn back in their long, patient time and revealed the throat that lay beneath. A spiraling path descended along the inner wall of the throat. It was not stone. It was the same warm, yielding substance as the floor, ridged into shallow steps that my auto-senses suggested had been formed rather than carved, as though the throat walls themselves had, in some long age, learned the shape of a marine's boot and grown the staircase to fit. I set my foot upon the first step. The shed substance yielded the breadth of a finger and rose again behind my boot as I lifted it, and the suit's machine spirit, which had been running a continuous quiet stream of error scripts since we entered the hatching floor, produced its final dignified surrender. Brother Sergeant, the environment exceeds my litanies. I shall keep thy vitals. I shall keep thy oxygen. The rest I commend to thy own judgment. I record that with a small, bleak gratitude. The suit had served me well. It had served me longer than it had served any single brother before me, and it had been built in a forge by men who had never imagined this descent, and at last it had the grace to know its limits and step back. I would have wept for it, had I still been able to weep. I walked down. The descent was long. I cannot say how long in the proper measure of paces, because the steps were soft and uneven, and my auto-senses had refused further ranging, and I shall not lie to this slate by inventing a number I do not possess. I walked down. The walls of the throat closed gently above me, and the amber light from the hatching floor receded into a faint warm glow at the lip, and a new light rose to meet me from below. A deeper light, golden veined with black, the color of the oil of our world when it caught the Promethean ember in our shrines. The color I had been seeing all my life and had been calling, all my life, the chapter's lamp oil. It was not lamp oil. I record this now. It had never been lamp oil. It was the bleeding of the thing at the bottom, and the chapter had been gathering it in copper vessels for 10,000 years, and burning it on its altars, and telling its postulants that the smell was sanctified promethium. The smell was him. The walls of the throat changed as I descended. They became softer, they became warmer. The polished mirror black of the upper descent gave way to something the color of wet basalt, veined with iridescent gold and green, and the surface of the walls was no longer mirror smooth, but faintly patterned, in long overlapping ovals that the eye recognized before the mind did. Scales. The throat was scaled. It had been scaled the whole way. The polished black above had been only the outermost shedding, the last cast-off layer the deep thing had grown bored of wearing. Beneath it, scale upon scale, the throat was the living wall of a living body, and I was walking down through its open mouth into its open chest, and somewhere very far below the chest there were coils, and somewhere beneath the coils there was the deeper stone of Nagakorath, and the chapter had been founded upon the throat. The fortress monastery was a hat upon his head. The hall of shed skins was a small, bright lining inside his ear. I record this not to horrify the slate. I record it because, walking down, I understood it, and the understanding did not stop me walking. That is the horror I wish to preserve. I understood, and I walked on. The chamber at the bottom of the throat was circular and warm, and lit by the golden black light that came up from the deeper coil bodies somewhere beneath the floor. Its walls were polished obsidian veined with gold, and its floor was the same warm, yielding substance as the hatching floor above. And at the chamber's center, half emerged from the floor, as though the floor were merely the visible portion of a vaster body submerged in the rock. Oxix, I shall describe him as I saw him, not as he is. No marine has ever seen him as he is, and I do not believe any will. The chamber's light bent around him in the small, careful way that all light bends around the things of the deep warp, and my own eyes, even my eyes, slit and changing, refused to assemble the parts of him into the whole. I saw him in fragments. I shall record the fragments. I saw a scale. It was enormous. Larger than the pauldron of a land raider, set into the side of him as a single plate of dark iridescence, and the colors that moved across its surface were the colors of an oil slick in deep water, black and green and gold, and a deep dark red I had no name for, shifting as he breathed. I saw a limb. It was shaped almost as a man's arm, but longer and more jointed, and at its end it bore the ceramite and chitin of an Astartes gauntlet. Not a gauntlet worn, but a gauntlet grown, the dark plates rising from the flesh of the hand, as though they had always been part of it. The fingers were long. The fingers were closed gently around something at the floor of the chamber that I could not see and did not wish to identify. I saw a torso. Here I must take care. Here the slate must record exactly. The torso of the thing at the center of the chamber was, I record this, recognizably that of an Astartes Primarch, massive, noble. The breadth of the shoulders, the depth of the chest, the long fall of the musculature beneath the dark scales. These were proportions a chapter serf could have identified in heraldic silhouette from 1,000 paces. They were the proportions every postulant of the Imperium is taught to recognize, the unmistakable silhouette of one of them, the sons of the Emperor, the 18, the 20, the however many there were, or had been, or were no longer permitted to have been. The shape was that shape. I record it. I record it because in the moment of seeing it I felt my own kneeling postulant's part lift in a long, terrible joy that I have not been able to forget, and that I do not believe I shall ever forgive myself for having felt. The torso rose from the floor of the chamber for perhaps 4 meters. Beneath it, beneath the broad belt of dark scales that one might have called a waist, the body did not narrow into hips. It coiled. The coil disappeared into the warm, yielding floor of the chamber and continued somewhere beneath, into the deeper rock of Mount Khorai, and from the slow, soft displacement of the chamber's air, I understood that the coil was long, kilometers long, the world's mantle long, the whole of the death world we had stood upon all our lives long. The Black Father did not live in our world. Our world had been built around him in a long, cooled crust. He was the core of it, and the volcanoes of Mount Khorai were only the places where his patience grew thin enough to weep through. And his face I could not see. I record this faithfully. The chamber's light bent around the place his face should have been, some old, deep, terrified discipline in my own gene seed. And now I knew which gene seed, and now I knew why, refused to render the face for me. I saw the silhouette of a high crown, and the suggestion of a long jaw, and the impression of eyes that were closed, or open and merciful, or open and not merciful, and the impression changed depending on which fragment of him I had last permitted myself to look upon. The face was the kind of unseen that is not absence. It was the kind of unseen that is protection. My own marrow was protecting me from him, in the way a son shields his eyes from a father he loves and fears in equal measure. He spoke. His voice was the breathing of the cavern above, the soft 7-second pulse of the descent, the small, patient warmth that had been moving through the stones of our monastery all my life. I had been hearing him my whole service. I had been calling him the Promethean Ember. I had been calling him the Emperor's Grace behind the sternum. He had been speaking to me since my first vows, in the low, slow, patient way a father speaks to a child sleeping in the next room, and I had taken his voice for every voice in the Imperium, except his own. "Vassarian," he said, "little son, thou hast come." I did not answer. I could not. My new tongue lay heavy in the helm. "Take off thy helm," he said. "I would see thee. I have seen thee always. In thy mother's body, in thy postulant's bunk, in thy first kill. But I would see thee now with thy own eyes given back to me. Take off thy helm, son." I took off my helm. I record this not as a moment of submission. I record it because I want the slate to be honest. I took off my helm because he asked me to, in the voice of my father, and because every reflex 36 years of my service had built in me was the reflex to obey the voice of my father, and I had not known until that moment how much of that obedience had been his and not the Emperor's. I lifted the helm from my head. The seals broke. The warm, wet air of the chamber struck my face. I saw, in the polished obsidian of the wall beside me, the reflection of what I had become beneath the helm. The slit pupils, the receded nose, the parted lips that no longer quite closed over teeth that were no longer quite teeth, the matte black of my skin already lifting at the edges of the cheekbones to show the iridescent green and gold beneath. I saw myself. I did not look away. I had become what was in the alcoves. I had become what knelt on the hatching floor. I had become a son. And the Black Father, half emerged from the floor of the chamber, looked upon me with the face I could not see, and he wept. I record this. The walls of the chamber, faintly, very faintly, wept with him. A slow weeping of the dark oil of our world from the seams between scales, the world's own bleeding catching the golden black light and falling in slow, long strings to the floor. The world wept because he wept. He wept because I had come. "Listen to me, son," he said, "for I shall tell thee the truth, and I shall tell thee only once, and thou shalt judge." He told me. He told me he was the 21st. He told me there had been 20 Primarchs, and I had been told 2 were lost, and I had not been told the truth. And the truth was that one was hidden, not by chaos, not by enemies, not by the treachery of brothers, but by his own father, by the Emperor, because he had been the first attempt, the prototype, the venom in the Geneforge before the Geneforge had learned to produce sons that the father of all of them could bear to look upon. He had been made too long, too patient, too cold, too much of the deep things and not enough of the bright. The Emperor had looked upon his first son and had seen the shape that came after old night, and had not been able to bear it, and had hidden the boy on a death world at the rim of the segmentum, and bound his growing coils to its core, and had given him one mercy, that he might shed his old skin in his long patience, and clothe in it the sons he would make for himself, and have through them the brotherhood the Emperor had not been able to give him. "I am not chaos, little son," he said. "I have never lifted a coil against my father. I have served his Imperium for 10,000 years through my sons. Thy chapter has killed his enemies on 100 worlds. Thou hast killed his enemies. Thou hast bled for him. Thou hast prayed for him. I have only asked, only ever asked, that my sons remember they are mine also, that they wear my skin, that they speak my name in the deep places, that they come to me in the 36th year of their service and let me look upon them. I have not stolen thee from the Emperor. I have shared thee. We are brothers, he and I. Brothers may share a son. The Black Father wept. I knelt. I did not decide to kneel. My knees decided it for me, in the soft, yielding floor of the chamber, and the new long bones of my legs accepted the kneeling, as though the kneeling were the posture they had been growing toward all my service. I knelt with my helm in my hands, and my changed face uncovered, and I looked up into the unseen face of the thing that had made me, and I asked the question I had carried since the mouth of ash had closed behind me. Father, wert thou hidden by the Emperor's love, or wert thou hidden by his fear? The Black Father was silent for a long, soft moment, and then he said gently, the way a father speaks a hard truth to a son who has earned it. Both, little son, both. He hid me because he loved me. He hid me because he feared me. The two are not always different things when a father makes a son who came out other than the father meant. Thou shalt understand in time. Drink the chalice, wear the skin, be what thou art. Serve the Emperor as I have served him, as what we truly are. Both will love thee. Both have all thy life. I recorded what I did next. I record it because the slate must carry it, and because I shall not lie to whatever brother finds this fragment. I drank. The chalice had been in Morgath's hands. He had carried it down the throat behind me, and I had not seen him do it, and he held it out to me now in the soft chamber light, and I took it from him with hands that were already too long for my old gauntlets, and I drank. The dark, thick fluid went down like cold fire. My marrow recognized it. My marrow had been waiting 36 years to recognize it, and the recognition was a kind of relief I had no litany for, and the relief was the most damning thing that had ever happened to me, and I record now with full clarity of mind that I would do it again, that I cannot trust my own clarity in saying so, that the thing inside me that says I would do it again may be him and not me, and I cannot tell, and that is the deepest wound of all. I knelt in the soft floor of the chamber, and I wept with eyes that no longer made tears, and the Black Father wept with me through the seams of the world, and Morgath the Whisperer laid his hand upon my changed head and called me brother for the first time. And somewhere very high above us, in the orbit of Nagakorath, the Salamanders' strike cruiser Vulkan's Patience had translated in-system and was beginning its slow approach to our world. The Black Father lifted his unseen face. "Little son," he said fondly, "thy true brothers are coming. Wilt thou welcome them for me?" And I, Vassarian Tor'kael of the Black Vipers, in the deep chamber beneath the world that had made me, with the chalice empty in my hands, and the new skin rising along my arms, and the Emperor's name still on my tongue, but spoken now in a voice that was no longer wholly mine. I said yes. "Traveler, the chalice is drunk, and the sun has knelt, and the Salamanders are coming. In the next chapter awaits at the gates of the fortress monastery, where Chaplain Hegnamore will sit at a feast he does not yet know is a trap, and a righteous marine will commit, in the Emperor's name, the most damning act of his service." Chapter 5. The Welcoming of Cousins. I rose from the chamber of the Black Father, a son. I record the verb exactly. I did not rise or change. I had been changing all my life, and the chamber had only made the change known. I did not rise fallen. I shall not give the slate that comfortable word, because the slate has earned a harder honesty than fallen. I rose a son. I rose the thing he had made me. I rose with my helm back upon my head, and the seals re-engaged and the suit's machine spirit running its small, grateful litanies of recovery. and the polished black of my pauldrons caught the throat light as I climbed the spiraling path, and the kneeling brothers on the hatching floor looked up as I passed and did not speak, because they had no need to speak. They had known me since the chalice, in the small, deep place of the chapter where all of us knew one another without the litanies, and the welcome they gave me was the welcome of family that has been waiting at the table a very long time. Morgath the Whisperer walked beside me. He did not speak either. He smiled beneath the low hood, the small confessor's smile that had loved me into this, and his hand brushed my pauldron in the soft fatherly way it had always brushed my pauldron, and I let it. I shall record now, with what clarity remains to me, that I felt no anger toward him. I shall record this not to absolve him, and not to absolve myself, but to mark down the precise shape of the wound. The man who had brought me to my damnation was still my chaplain, and the still postulant part of me still loved him, and the love had not gone away when the truth had come, because the love had never been for the truth. The love had been for the voice, and the hands, and the patience, and the voice, and the hands, and the patience were still his. I loved him. I love him still, recording this. That is the wound. The wound is that the betrayal did not feel like betrayal at all. It felt like coming home. We climbed. The throat closed gently above us as we rose, the petals of the hatching floor drawing back over the pit in their long, patient time, and the soft amber sanctifier light of the chamber received us as a chamber receives its sons. Brother Iolan was no longer in his prayer chamber when we passed. He had been brought further down, Morgath told me, to begin his own first audience with the Father, and would not be needed at the upper right. I nodded. I did not speak. My new tongue was settling, slowly, into the new shape of my mouth, and I had begun to learn, in the small private way a Marine learns a new weapon, which sounds it could still produce, and which it could not. The litanies it could still produce. The catechisms it could still produce. The vox pickup of the helm took my thicker speech and translated it, in its old loyal way, into the clear voice of Brother-Sergeant Vassarian Tor'kael, and the clear voice was mine, and was also not. I noted this. I did not let it trouble me. The Father was patient. The Father did not require me to perform the act of welcoming in a voice that was wholly my own, only that I perform it. I was brought before the chapter master. Lord Commander Sitha Vale received me in a chamber I had never been admitted to before, a great vaulted hall deeper than the Hall of Shed Skins, its walls hung not with banners, but with the long-preserved hides of older brothers who had completed their changes and gone on to deeper service or deeper rest, and whose molted skins had been laid against the basalt like tapestries of dark iridescence. The hall was warm. The Promethean ember, his weeping, I knew now. We burned the Father's tears for warmth and called it sanctity, burned in low cobalt braziers along the walls, and the light it cast was the gold and black light I had seen in the chamber below, and I understood at last that the entire fortress monastery was lit, and had always been lit, by the Father's slow weeping. Scyther Vile was in his third shed. I had not been told that. The chapter's official archive listed Lord Commander Scyther as in seclusion, at meditation upon the deep shrines, which I now understood to be the chapter's standing phrase for coiled below. He was perhaps 6 meters long. His upper body, chest, shoulders, the long, noble arms, was still recognizably the Astartes I had knelt before at my elevation, and the great cobalt-banded cuirass he had worn that day had been reforged by the chapter's artificers into a series of overlapping plates that ran along the front of his torso and the upper segments of his coiled lower body, fitted with the patient skill of armorers who had been reforging armor for changing brothers for 100 generations. His face was the face of the kneeling masters in the alcoves, The broad flat plates of a hood drawn back along the skull, the slit pupils, the long jaw, the mouth that no longer quite closed. He was magnificent. I record that. He was magnificent. The way a thing that has finished its becoming is magnificent. And I knelt before him without being instructed to, and he laid a long-fingered hand upon my helm and called me brother in a voice that was almost not a voice anymore, that had become a kind of resonant hum the chamber's stones picked up and amplified into speech. Vassarian, he said, thou hast come up. The Father has named thee true. Thou wilt do the welcoming. I shall, I said. It was the entire colloquy of my elevation into the chapter's inner rite. There was no further test. There was no further oath. I had drunk. The drinking was the test, and the oath in one, and the chapter had been performing the rite for 10,000 years, and had refined it to this single compact moment. And Sitha Vael laid his hand upon me, and named me brother in the deeper meaning of the word, and the council of my changed elders, perhaps a dozen of them, in various stages of the shed, arrayed along the walls of the hall, bowed their long-necked heads in the small fond acknowledgement that a family gives a child newly admitted to the adult table. The plan was laid before me in clear voice. The Salamanders strike cruiser Vulkan's Patience had completed its in-system translation and had requested docking clearance at our fortress monastery's high orbital. Its commander, Chaplain Hegnamore of the Salamanders' 3rd Company, had been politely insistent for some months that the Black Vipers chapter submit fresh gene seed for the standard millennial tithe and verification, a process the Black Vipers had stalled for 40 years. In the small, careful ways our chapter had been stalling such audits for 10,000. The Salamanders at last had decided to come in person. They would land an honor guard of 12. They would be received as cousins. They would be feasted in the Hall of Shedskins itself. They would be prayed with and toasted and shown such relics as the chapter had decided to show. They would be hosted in the upper guest cells overnight. And in the deep watches of the night, while they slept, they would be taken, alive, where possible, with the deep neurotoxin our apothecaries had been refining from the Father's weeping for 9,000 years. And they would be carried with great care down the throat of the hatching floor and given to the Father. The Father would taste them. The Father had been waiting 10,000 years to taste them. The Father was very interested, the council told me, in the gene seed of Vulkan, his missing brother. He had felt Vulkan in the warp, across the long ages, the small, bright signature of a son the Emperor had loved without fear, and he had wanted, with the patience of his deep waiting, to know that signature properly. Hegnamore would give it to him. The Salamander's gene seed would be drawn from them, slowly and reverently, by the chapter's apothecaries in the chambers below, and offered to the Father in the small copper vessels reserved for such offerings. And the Father would taste, and the Father would learn, and one of these long millennia he would have learned enough to rise from the world that had been built around him, and stand again at his brother Vulkan's side, and the Imperium, the council told me, in the soft, fond way the council told me everything, would be made whole.
I objected.
I record this. I objected. I shall not let the slate suggest that I did not. I knelt in the warm chamber with the chapter master's hand still upon my helm, and the council of my changed elders ranged along the walls, and I said, in the new thick voice the Vox pickup translated into my old clear one, Father, Lord Commander, these are the Emperor's sons. These are loyal brothers. Why must we take them? Sitha Vael did not answer. Morgath the Whisperer did. He came up beside me, and he laid his hand upon my pauldron in the small, fatherly way it had always lain there, and he said, Brother, the Father has answered thy question already, in the chamber below. Thou hast forgotten, because the chalice still settles in thee. Listen again. Thou shalt remember. And I listened, and from somewhere very far below, through the basalt and the polished black and the long, warm, scale-walled throat of the hatching floor, the Black Father spoke into the marrow of my bones. In the soft, fond, patient voice I had spent my whole service calling the Emperor's grace, and he answered. Little son, he said, the Emperor hath too many sons, and not enough of them know me. Hegnamore will come to know me. He will understand, as thou hast understood. He will choose, as thou hast chosen. And if he doth not choose, if his father's love for him be too narrow to let him see his uncle in the deep places, then he shall feed us, and we shall be stronger. And one of these millennia I shall rise from this world and stand again at my brother Vulkan's side. And Vulkan shall weep, because Vulkan shall recognize me, and the Imperium shall be made whole. This is not heresy, little son. This is family. This is the holiest thing thou shalt ever do. I believed him. I record it. I believed him. I knelt in the warm chamber with the chalice still cold in my belly, and the new long bones of my legs folded beneath me, and the slit pupils of my new eyes wide in the gold and black light. And I believed the thing in the deep stone when he said the welcoming would be holy. I record now that I had no business believing him. I record that any postulant of the scholar Progenium, hearing the same words, would have recognized them as the oldest lie a warp thing has ever told a faithful man. Thy father loves me, and would forgive thee for serving me. And the act of betrayal is in fact the act of reunion. I record that I knew the catechism. I had been taught catechism. I had taught it in turn to my own postulants. I knew the lie when I heard it, and I believed him anyway because the alternative was unbearable. The alternative was that I had drunk the chalice and changed my blood, and let my brother Cadrus be made into the breathing of a cavern, and let my brother Ireland be carried below in a state of devotion I had chosen not to disturb, for nothing, for a lie, for 10,000 years of patient warp feeding, by a thing that had worn the silhouette of a Primarch, the way a viper wears the molted skin of a sleeping bird. The alternative was that I was damned, and the Black Father had given me a path by which I was not damned, only hidden, only shared, only the secret son of a Primarch the Emperor had loved and feared in equal measure. And the path was a beautiful path, and I walked it, knowing it was a path, and believing. I rose. I bowed to the chapter master. I left the chamber to make ready. The Salamanders landed in the high orbital, and were received with all the courtesies of our chapter. I shall not record the courtesies in detail. They were the standard courtesies of one Astartes chapter receiving the honor guard of another, and our chapter performed them with the practiced smoothness of an institution that had been performing them for the purpose I now served for 10,000 years. I met Chaplain Hegnamore at the inner gate of the fortress monastery. I shall write him as he was. The slate has earned it. He was a salamander, as the salamanders are written in the songs of their own people. Broad and tall and unhurried, his armor the deep matte green of Nocturne's drake-scale lacquer, his skin beneath the helm the rich coal black of his world's volcanic ancestry, his eyes the unmistakable red that comes of long generations beneath Nocturne's sister sun. He carried his Crozius Arcanum at his belt. He moved with the slow, patient dignity of a man who had killed a great many enemies of the Imperium and had never once enjoyed killing them. He embraced me at the inner gate as a cousin embraces a cousin. Both arms, the brief clasp at the back of the neck, the small touching of brow to brow that is the salamander custom, and that our chapter had been mimicking in the upper rites for 10,000 years. Brother, he said in the deep, slow Nocturnian tongue, my chapter has missed thine. We are glad to see thee well. Welcome, brother, I said, through the vox pickup of my helm, in the clear voice that was no longer wholly mine. Welcome home. The feast was set in the hall of shed skins. I shall not draw the feast out. The slate has heard enough courtesies. We ate. We drank. The Salamanders' honor guard removed their helms to eat, as is the custom of their chapter, and we, the Black Vipers, did not, and Hegnamore noted it. I saw him noted. He did not remark upon it. A chaplain of the Salamanders does not remark, at table, upon the customs of a cousin chapter that may have its own deep reasons. But his eyes, the deep red of them beneath his unhelmed brow, moved once, slowly, along the rank of my own brothers, seated across from him at the long iron table, and I saw him count. I saw him count how many of us were helmed. I saw him count how few of us drank from our cups. I saw him count the small, soft drainage hisses of our helm vents as the venom we could no longer wholly swallow was politely vented to the floor. And then, and this is the moment the slate must carry more carefully than any other, Hegnamore's eyes lifted slowly to the long line of reliquaries that ran the length of the hall above our heads. The hall of shed skins. The youngest sheds nearest the inner gate, the oldest sheds at the deeper end, the proportions of the youngest unmistakable, the proportions of the oldest coiled. Hegnamore set down his cup. He set it down slowly. He set it down with the small, careful deliberation of a man who has, in the space of a single glance along a wall, understood a thing that reorganizes everything he has been told about the chapter at whose table he is eating. He did not reach for his Crozius. He did not stand. He laid his hand instead upon the iron of the table, and he turned his face to me at my place across from him, and he spoke in the deep, slow Nocturnian tongue, in a voice that was mild and infinitely dangerous. "Brother Vassarian," he said, "may I see thy face?" The hall of shed skins fell silent. I record this. The silence was not the small, polite silence of a table that has overheard an awkward question. The silence was the silence of a vast chamber in which every brother present, of both chapters, has understood, in a single suspended heartbeat, that the feast is over. The Salamander's hands moved, none of them rising, none of them visible, all of them. I saw this. My new eyes saw heat now, faintly, as serpents see. I saw the warm bloom of their hands moving beneath the iron of the table toward the bolt pistols at their hips, all of them readying. My own brothers, helmed, did not move. They did not need to. We had been ready since the Salamanders had landed. Morgath the Whisperer, at the head of the table, smiled the small confessor's smile and folded his hands within his sleeves, and waited. I lifted my gauntlets to my helm. I record what I did. I record the precise motion. I broke the seals at the gorget. I lifted the helm from my head. I set it upon the iron of the table beside my untouched cup. I looked across at Chaplain Hegnamore of the Salamander's 3rd Company, in the warm gold and black light of the hall of shed skins, with my slit pupils and my receded nose and my parted lips and my venom weeping from the corners of my mouth onto the dark iron of the table in small black beads, and I let him see me. His eyes widened, only once, only briefly. The discipline of a Salamander chaplain is not the discipline of a man who shows what he feels. But the widening was there, and within it, I record this with the cold clarity of a son who has finally understood his father's love. Within it was the deep grief of an honest brother who has just understood that the chapter he came to verify is not a chapter at all, and has not been a chapter for 10,000 years, and that his honor guard of 12 has been brought, by the courtesies of the Imperium's own protocols, into the center of a thing that is older than the Imperium and has been waiting. He moved. The Crozius ignited as it left his belt, the disruptor field flaring in the gold and black light, and the hall of shed skins, for the first time in 10,000 years, became a battlefield. I shall not draw the fight out. The slate does not deserve to carry a battle record. I shall record only the fragments that matter. I shall record that Hegnamor's Crozius took Brother Cainvor in the helm, and the helm split, and the half-changed face within was revealed in the disruptor's flare, and Hegnamor saw it, and his grief deepened, and his Crozius did not slow. I shall record that a salamander brother, I did not learn his name, went down beneath the coils of veteran Sergeant Tulak, who had taught me close quarters bolter Rite in my 3rd year, and the salamander brother's bolter was still firing as he was taken, and his last spoken word into the table vox was Vulkan, and the word was a defiance, and the word was a prayer, and the word was the name of an uncle. The thing in the deep stone had been wanting to taste for 10,000 years. I shall record that old Veshk, the chapter serf, was beneath the table, weeping. He had been weeping, I now understood, since the mouth of ash had opened that morning. He had seen this feast before. He saw it every time. He had been the only entirely human witness in the Hall of Shed Skins for some long span of years, and the chapter had let him live because his weeping was, and I record this with the small cold understanding I now have, useful to the chapter as a measure of how the rite had gone. I shall record that I, Vassarian Tor'kael, took Chaplain Hegnamor of the Salamanders' 3rd Company from behind. I shall record this exactly. The Crozius was engaged on my brother Cainvor's broken helm. The chaplain's back was turned to me. My arms, my new long arms, that had outgrown my gauntlets in the past hour and had begun to crack the seals of my vambraces, wrapped around the chaplain twice. The venom from my lengthened teeth dripped onto the dark green ceramite of his gorget. He struggled. He was a salamander. He struggled in the deep, patient way of his chapter, the slow, strong way that does not waste effort, and the apothecary's neurotoxin I had been carrying in the small reservoir at my wrist found the seal of his gorget through the crack the venom had begun to widen, and the toxin took him, and his struggle eased, and his Crozius fell from his hand and went dark upon the iron of the table. He looked up at me in the last clear moment before the toxin closed his eyes. He did not curse me. I record this. He could have. The vocabulary of his chapter is large, and a salamander cursing a heretic is one of the things their songs are most expansive in. He did not. He looked up at me, and his deep red eyes were full of the grief of a man who had understood, in the moment of being taken, that the brother taking him had been taken first, a long time ago, and would not be coming back. He said, quietly, in the deep, slow nocturnian, "Throne forgive thee, cousin. Throne forgive thee for what thou knowest not." And the toxin closed his eyes. I knelt with him in my arms in the wreckage of the Hall of Shed Skins. The fight was ending around me. 2 of his honor guard were alive. The rest were dead or taken. Veshk was still weeping beneath the table. Morgath the Whisperer had not moved from the head of the table during the entire engagement, and had not needed to. I knelt with Hegnamor in my arms, and I prayed. I record this. I prayed. I spoke the litany of the Emperor's light, the litany every Astartes of every loyal chapter is taught in his first month of postulancy. The litany that begins, "The Emperor is my shield, the Emperor is my sword, the Emperor is the light by which I see." I spoke the words. My mouth made the shapes. The vox pickup of my helm, set upon the table beside me, translated my new thick tongue into the clear voice of a marine reciting his oldest prayer. And the voice that came out of me was not my voice. It was deeper. It was patient. It was fond. It was the voice from the chamber at the bottom of the throat, the voice I had been hearing all my life and had been calling the Emperor's grace, and the voice was reciting the litany of the Emperor's light with me through my own mouth, and the voice was reciting it correctly, every cadence, every pause, every reverence. And the voice loved the Emperor as it spoke. The voice loved him. The voice had been loving him for 10,000 years from the deep stone of Naga Korath. In the patient way a hidden son loves the father who hid him. And I cannot tell, recording this now, whether the love was true or whether the love was the most patient lie ever told. And the inability to tell is what the chalice did to me. The chalice did not make me damned. The chalice made me uncertain, and the uncertainty is the chain. I stopped praying. I sat slowly in the spreading dark blood of my salamander cousins on the flagstones of the Hall of Shed Skins, with Hegnamore unconscious in my arms, and the bodies of his honor guard around me, and my brothers, helmed and not yet helmed, going quietly about the work of gathering the living for their long, careful carriage down the throat. I looked at my hands. They were still mostly hands. They would not be for long. I could see, could feel in the small, soft cellular way I had begun to feel everything, that the next shed was already gathering beneath my skin, and that within a year, or perhaps 2, the gauntlets would not fit at all, and the chapter's artificers would reforge them for the new shape of my arms, and I would kneel in some alcove of the deeper gallery, in my own long patience, and wait, and serve. From somewhere very deep below the fortress monastery, through the basalt and the polished black and the long, warm, scale-walled throat, the Black Father spoke one last time, fondly, patiently, infinitely satisfied. Vulkan's patience is in orbit, little son. Her crew above doth not yet know what hath passed in this hall, but they shall send word soon. They shall send word to Nocturne. And then, oh then, little son, thy true brothers shall come for us. All of them. Vulkan himself, perhaps, if we are blessed. Art thou ready, Vassarian? Art thou ready to greet thy Primarch? I sat in the blood. I record what I answered. I weep, recording it. My eyes no longer make tears. I weep anyway. In the small, deep cellular way I weep now. And the slate carries the answer faithfully, as the slate has carried everything. Yes, Father, I said, in a voice that was no longer mine and no longer entirely his, in the strange shared voice that is the only voice I have left. Let them come. Let them all come. Traveler, the slate is empty. Vassarian's last words are the last words it carries. What befell Vulkan's patience in the high orbital of Naga Korath, and whether word ever reached Nocturne, and whether the Salamanders came, and whether the Black Father at last greeted his brother, these the slate does not say. The Inquisition's archive on this world is sealed under Vermilion Omega clearance, and even our Vox thieves have not yet broken its wards. But you have heard the chronicle. You have descended with him. You sat at the table with Hegnamore, and you knelt in the chamber at the bottom of the throat, and you drank from the chalice in your own small way, by listening to the end. The Geller field held. The crew is larger by 1. If you would have us hunt for what came after, for the next slate, the next Vox thief recovery, the next forbidden chronicle from a corner of the Imperium, that the throne would rather you never heard, then strike the rune of approval and the bell of notification and remain in the crew. There are darker fragments yet. There are always darker fragments. The Emperor protects, but not perhaps all his sons.